My name is Camila. I am the International Affairs and Product Director at AmCham Brazil. So welcome everyone to our webinar today, talking about Brazilian opportunities and how to do business and invest in Brazil. I would like to introduce my partners here at AmCham Brazil, and we're invited to discuss a little bit and to bring information for you today about these opportunities. I will start with Ramon Fernandes. He's the managing partner at Mourão Campos, a law firm exclusively focused on providing attorney fact services for foreign companies in Brazil and legal representation of natural persons associated with their clients. Ramon has an extensive background experience in developing corporate strategies for legal and business aspects of foreign-owned enterprises in Brazil. So thank you very much for joining us today, and welcome.
Good afternoon, everyone. To be here.
Great. And André Menescal is a managing partner at Nelson Wilians, Advogados and Associados, a law firm that is present in every Brazilian capital city. André holds an LLM degree in corporate law. His main practice areas being corporate and tax law. He is responsible for the firm's branches in the states of Ceará and Maranhão in the Northeast region. Welcome, André, and thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you, Camila, for the invitation. I'm very happy to be here, and I hope to cooperate with the questions that you have for us.
Oh, great. So thank you so much for being here, and thanks so much for joining us. Our main objective today is to help you, and this is more of a discussion and an interview, and we would try to do that to bring as much information that we can have for you today. And before I start talking about a little bit on Brazilian highlights, I would like just to bring information about what we are, AmCham Brazil, and what we represent. AmCham Brazil has around 5,000 corporate members. Is one of the largest AmChams outside of United States. We have around 350 employees in Brazil, 15 regional branches looking from the northeast part of Brazil to the south of Brazil. We are very active on our events and what we provide for our members. Our main purpose is to fight for a better business environment for companies that are doing business in Brazil, either for American companies, but also for Brazilian companies. Most of our membership today are actually Brazilian companies from various sectors, coming from law firms to manufacturers to pharmaceutical and other enterprises. We have our department of advocacy of lobby in Brazil to support with the Brazilian government and also with the U.S. government to help to support the bilateral relationship between foster the bilateral relation between Brazil and U.S., but also support reforms that are important for Brazil and help to have a better business environment and attraction of investments. We are very active with our membership, with the more than almost 100,000 of executives that participate in AmCham activities every year. And actually this year is very important for us, where we are celebrating our anniversary, 100-year anniversary in Brazil. And it's really great that we could coordinate with other AmChams this great webinar today. Start talking about Brazil. So everybody, I think if you can listen a little bit on the news, we know about what we have on the what we are living now on the country. We have a new president elected. We have a very important market of consumers. We have 200 million people in Brazil, mostly on the middle class, so Brazilian middle class. And we have very secure institutions around the country as well. Of course, Brazil is improving its technology parks. I'm showing there some highlights for you. It's just some numbers that we can send you for you afterwards to have this very broad perspective on Brazilian politics and technology, economics, and society. But what we want to discuss with our invitees today is how to do business and invest in Brazil and what are the opportunities that we have nowadays. So to start with you, I'd like to ask a question for both of you. What are the main opportunities that you are seeing in Brazil right now?
Well, again, good afternoon for everyone, and taking opportunity from what Camila has just said. We have very huge numbers in Brazil. Economically, maybe this is a continent country, but we have to be together, the whole Latin America, and it's going to be easy to decide for every country to be in Brazil as an investor with their business. The tough question would be how to do that. And going back to the question, the opportunities in Brazil are in the many different kinds of markets, from infrastructure to final consumer markets. So we have 200,000 people to consume everything you can sell in here. So opportunities you will find everywhere in Brazil. And counting on structures like AmCham and those law firms and the people who works with this kind of market, it's a great trick for you to be in here as fast as you can as an investor in order to explore the local market, which is, as I said, huge, very huge, you know.
I think I would, first of all, I would like to thank you again. Thank AmCham for the invitation. Thank Camila for the opportunity to be here. Thank you, Ramon, for the opportunity to debate the answers that we might have here today.
My pleasure.
And the thing I would like to add after Ramon's answer is the fact that we have a continental country. It is such a huge country that there are so many regions throughout the country that are still yet to be explored. So when we think of opportunities, we shouldn't think only about São Paulo, Rio, Brasilia, but we should remember that there are 27 states in Brazil, and some of them with plenty of natural resources waiting for the investments and for people to come and open their companies and do everything that has been expecting to be done in the past few years.
There's people to consume everywhere. So
exactly.
Yeah.
There's a big consumer market. I think there's a great workforce. After all, it's more than 200 million people, and still a few of those million are still unemployed. So this is a country where you have the workforce, the natural resources, you have a democratic system. We will discuss later how these laws evolve and how they relate to themselves, but still, it is a democratic system and a continental country. So I think there are plenty of opportunities, yes.
And even, I would say, even our gaps, when we talk about, for example, infrastructure, and in a sector that we are actually, we are developing in many parts of Brazil, but is definitely is part of our gap in some places. But even our gaps, they propose, in fact, there are opportunities for investments.
Sure. The more gaps you have, more opportunities can be taken.
Exactly. Great. Going for okay, let's say that you convince me. I don't know if you convince me on this, is just short speech, but let's say you convince me. What are the first steps for me to invest in Brazil? What would be the first steps?
Okay, well, whatever you are going to do in Brazil, so regardless the market you choose to be here, you need to have a local ID inscription, you know, a taxpayer ID for you to handle your money here to start for the very first beginning of the business. So the first penny you can put in here must have be linked with we call as CNPJ is the wording, the letters for ID taxpayer for entities, something like this. And from the first time, you must have this bureaucratic thing in place for you to maybe open an account, or which is more common, it's opening a subsidiary, a local subsidiary in Brazil, which will have foreign entities as partners, as shareholders of this entity. And well, legally, you need to put this entity in place to be inscribed in the local Brazilian federal revenue for you to open an account in Brazilian central bank, and afterwards you can have a local bank for you to handle your money, which will be obviously the very first step. We usually listen that Brazil is a very bureaucratic place.
I would ask you that.
Yes,
point you
I
that.
know. So, but we try to handle this the best way. We have a new government in here, which is opening somehow the doors and maybe breaking those bureaucratic things step by step, which is not easy to do because we need to count out approvals from the political Congress or something like this. But we see a very new humor in here, you know, a kind of a new environment for foreign investors to be in Brazil, mainly for infrastructure. And as I told, the whole markets need some new investments for here, so brand new people to be working and new products and new technologies, and all of the markets need some special new technology from overseas. And then we know that bureaucracy will be the first fight we will see here in Brazil, but I would recommend working very hard from the very first step. It's the best recommendation we can give for everyone, because sometimes people try to cut corners, and we see after 1 or 2 or maybe many years, the problem growing up from nothing. But we can see the first step was made maybe wrongly, and this is something we recommend, to be more patient from the first time. Maybe a little bit more expensive will be the project because of that, but I would say this is going to be more safety for your business in here, so you can develop more and grow more hard if you invest from the very first time in safety, maybe good people to be working here. Obviously, you need to trust in people, but institutions like AmCham and those legal offices we have in here, law firms, we can count on most of them to be and to make a good job in here. And I've been facing this happening in my day-to-day from 10 years, and it's very nice to see when a business it's going to match the target. You know,
I've heard in São Paulo, actually, this São Paulo state, this is happening also in other states, but they are working on a fast track to open business in the state. So this is a movement on toward the word bank rank on Brazil is not the best place to do business, but aiming that direction, doing and even changing some part of the regulation or the bureaucratic process in order to provide a less bureaucratic environment for investors. And I want to please feel free to ask questions through our tool there. We're able to participate in our debate, and I want you to participate in our discussion as well. But talking about bureaucratic process, I will come back to you because I want to get that point on bureaucracy and ask you the question that everybody's asking in their head, because Brazil is known as the tax country, is a place where we have no, I wouldn't say high taxes, but the complexity of the tax system can be a problem for investor. How it's possible, and I know it's your expertise, but how is possible to understand the system and to navigate the complex tax system in Brazil?
Well, Camila, I'm sorry for the joke, but truly to understand it very well, 5 years of law degree and then some years of practice, you might be able to understand it quite
But
well.
we have a publication, and that I want to do my marketing here. We have a publication in AmCham called How to Do Business and Invest in Brazil. And we have a very good publication on tax sponsored by Nelson Wilians. So that's the start.
But just going back to the beginning of your question, bureaucracy is bad, but I think in Brazil we have learned how to deal with this bureaucracy for the past few years. Actually, for the whole of our history, that's the truth. So when we say Brazil is bureaucratic, truth is, for us lawyers, companies, especially the long-term companies, the ones that have been surviving for some decades now, the truth is we have learned how to deal with bureaucracy. So it is there, we don't like it, but we learned how to live with it. We cooperate with it. So this is one good thing. It exists, but we know how to deal with it. And the second important point that I would like to add is no country in the world will somehow reinforce companies and investors who started their own ways badly. So truth is, Brazil isn't different. If you go to the US, get your money, want to open a company, and you do it in a bad way, and you do it through the improper manners, you will be sanctioned, your company will be closed, and you might be facing the consequences for some years. So it is not different in Brazil. But the truth is, there are many laws in Brazil, most of them tax laws. Just to give you a number, there is an estimate that since the 1988 Constitution, more than 5,000 laws have been enacted in the municipal, state, and federal instances. So that means, and there is even a provision in Brazilian law that says everyone is expected to know the law. So you can see that this is a fiction, right?
Right.
So most of these laws are also tax laws, many of these laws. And I mean, back to your later question, how can we understand the system a little bit more simpler, in a simpler way? I think we should always remember that apart from many different countries, the tax system in Brazil is all based on the federal constitution. Everything that there is to know in a basic way about taxes in Brazil is established by our constitution. Everything that the municipalities do, everything that the states do, and everything that the federal government does in a tax environment needs to be based on the principles and the general rules established by our constitution. So knowing those rules, knowing that framework is definitely the best first start. It is not easy to read our constitution, especially if you're a layman, if you're not a specialist, but still it is valid to give it a read. And just a second point is there is a clear difference between the taxes that we consider to be the direct taxes. This is a very, how can I say, easy separation that has been made in Brazil between the direct taxes and the indirect taxes. So if we have to understand these more than 10, 12, 15 different taxes, and not also taxes, but social contributions and fees as well, we should always understand that there are two main types, direct taxes and indirect taxes. Going further on this, of course, you will need law firms, you will need accountants, but the truth is, it is a tax system such as in any different country. It has its own rules. And I would like to mention, I'm sorry for the long answer, but I would like to mention that there is a big advantage in this system. That is the fact that we have an accessible judiciary. Some might tell you that this is a bad thing because then we have millions of lawsuits, but I would say it is a good thing. If the federal government, the state government, the municipality does something illegal against you, that you consider to be illegal, we have a judiciary that is always open. Or some people who are not from the legal area place some criticisms every day about our judiciary, about the federal Supreme Court, but we should see it through a good point of view, I think.
And what about tax reform? What we are facing right now in our Congress, in the discussion and within our government, we have some proposals in our Congress on a new tax reform that will actually benefit the country and help on this complexity on the tax system. How do you think that the tax reform can impact on for the environment for investors?
Okay, this is a very good question, since tax reform is being more and more on the agenda since the Social Security reform has been approved. I think that was the first priority, and now we have to look at the tax reform. So all politics aside, and I don't think it's definitely not my place to discuss the deep details of politics, but all politics aside, I think what needs to be known about the tax reform, and I'm talking about the main project in Congress right now, is that it simplifies the system. The tax burden itself will not change much. It's basically going to be the same thing, a transition in 10 years, which in terms of history is very quick, and it will simplify 5 different taxes into just one. And if you ask me, what is the advantage if the tax burden will not change? The advantage of being simple is an advantage, and is an advantage in itself, especially because most of the tax law practice in Brazil, Ramon here will know this very well, most of what us tax lawyers do is to discuss the tax law, to place a new lawsuit in the judiciary, to discuss these tax laws before the administration, and
just because it is divided in many different taxes.
Exactly.
So,
yeah. You need to discuss this in an administrative instance, and then you will go to the judiciary. In this judiciary, you will have many appeals, both for us and for the national, for the other party, the tax authority. So to be honest, the good advantage about the tax reform that is now being discussed in Congress is the fact that it simplifies the system. So for any investor who's coming from another country to Brazil, it will give him or her a quick and easy look at how the tax system works. It will not be as long as it used to be for him to understand how it develops in Brazil. So I think the fact that we will simplify the system is already a huge advantage.
That's very good. And talking about reforms, we are facing at this moment with the new government in Brazil wanting the tax reform is one of them, but we have the first one approved in Congress. And I want to, Ramon, if you can comment about the pension reform, how does the mood of Brazilian business environment changed, and how is the environment changed with the approval of those very first reform in Bolsonaro's government?
Yeah, I would say initially the social security and those reforms are being very well received by the market because they can maybe better calculate the results of their business in Brazil. This is very important, as André said. The tax lawyers must to explain to their clients every tax they must pay. So why don't make this easier, and you can in a quick moment just calculate your results. So, and about social security and those reforms, it has reflected very nicely in the Brazilian market mainly for foreign investors, because they can now calculate something more precisely than before. It is been recently approved. We know their reflects are not in the table yet, but they can calculate many things for 20 years, 30 years ahead. And this is very important to count, because we've been facing Brazilian government being kind of broken because of their treatment of paying more pension than they receive in taxes. This is something very complicated to close the deal, and we've seen those reforms can and give us as a result something more positive, because government can catch some money through taxes and pay something which is maybe, how can I say, fair enough, more than is being for the last year. So it's a very hard discussion. We have this in place, as I said, very recently, but we need to see how this will reflect. But in terms of behavior of the investors, it's reflecting right now as a good thing, as a good news for everyone. So they are very excited to be in Brazil, counting on this more simpler way of calculate this cost of tax costs, of part of tax costs, because taxes divided in many different taxes. So,
Sure.
But making this simpler, I would say it's one of the first good steps we can face in our agenda today. It's good to hear this kind of news. You know.
Yes, it was good news for us Brazilian, for the companies that are actually doing business already in Brazil, but it's also it's a good movement for the board and what direction we are going for the next years. Talking about structure, and I would like to ask here, Ramon, as well. Talking about structure and how of course, some highlights. I mean, what type of companies the foreign investors can come, what type of structures that they can open in Brazil, and what do they have to observe in terms of legal and corporate environment?
The most usual format that foreign investors open their business in Brazil is through the limitada. It's a kind of limited, or it's very similar to the LLC we have in the US. This needs to count of at least 2 partners, 2 shareholders, as to be partner of this business. In the local business, we will have its own identity, you know. And this maybe 90% of the companies in Brazil has this format, and it is not as complicated as you can imagine. So we are bureaucratic, but as André said before, we have something very similar to other countries.
How fast we can open a company in Brazil?
Well, depends on how lucky you are. Just kidding. So yeah, we can open a business maybe in 15 days, or depending on the market of the company. If you need to have a very special license as pharmaceuticals or something, food, something more sensitive, you can take more than a month or 2 or something like this. But usually the legal entity can be open in 2 weeks or a little bit more. But the problem is before the process. So to start opening your company, you need, for example, to legalize your powers of attorney in the country that it's issued. So it's something you need to count on your calculation of timing. Maybe the Brazilian consulate there can take a month for you to give a stamp. It's not under discussion here in Brazil, but when you have all documentation in here, I would say 1 to 2 weeks be enough for you to have the legal entity opening. Not really working, but open legally, you know, to open a bank account or to bring your money in here. It's a step-by-step. But very first step, 1 to 2 weeks, going to be enough.
Is it necessary? I receive a lot here from questions. Is it necessary a local partner?
Not necessarily a local partner. So the company, maybe some special markets as maybe say farms or something which we own very huge parts of land, something like this. But we have, but generally you don't need to have a local partner. Which means the company can be 100% from other country. Their owners can be from there. The only thing that law requires is to have at least one person to be a representative of the foreign investors, and also to be the representative of the entity itself. So as an officer of the local and as an attorney in fact of the foreign investors. So this person must be in place from the first time as well. And this is something very complicated because this is something I work with, so I'm very specialist in this thing, because this can reflect for that person who is the local representative to be liable for many consequences of the company.
And how to mitigate that risk?
Well, it's important to count of, say, serious entities and serious law firms to represent your business in here, and a planning that counts on corporate governance rules, and you must be preoccupied about the compliance from the very first step as well. So it's an addition of many small tricks. You can be in here more safely, but again, you need to count on local, not partners, but providers who you can trust on. And this is something I strongly recommend every time, even it's not to hire my firm, but a firm which is in the market very seriously and applying the correct rules of corporate governance, and you have your contracts which are respected in Brazil very hardly. So, we have a very serious institutions when it comes to legal, compliant, and something like this. So, well, I believe this is my personal opinion, and I work with this for more than 10 years, and I really believe that you can work with serious people to represent your business in here. And, well, I would invite everyone to stay in here because, as we said in the beginning, very huge marketing, and we can work very seriously. Government trying to make these reforms to make the environment easier than it were before. And, well, for you to be here safely, counting on correct people will be the very first time. It's not easy decision. You need to count on contacts and something like this. But I would say it's very possible, and I would strongly recommend everyone to come here to Brazil and invest.
Talking about that, and André mentioned how big is Brazil and the opportunities elsewhere. I know that it's Brazilians usually when we go to US, we first think about Florida. I know that many investors, when we think about Brazil, and Brazil is not as big as the United States, but São Paulo, of course, is the business capital. But how you navigate? We are talking about opportunities, and Brazil is very big. And you are from a region that is also is also developing in many sectors. So how you navigate, how to understand where to locate, where are the opportunities geographically in Brazil?
That's a very good question, Camila. And I would, this is one thing that I'd always like to stress, not only because I come from the northeastern region of Brazil, proudly, but also because truly it is the main region where the investments didn't arrive in the past few years. So the truth is, where you have the bigger gaps, as Ramon already said, that's where you have the bigger opportunities. So, and just a quick comment on Ramon's last answer. In any place that you go, you will need good law firms and good accountants. That's not different in Brazil. That's a binomial. This is two things you will need very well in any place you go. You need a good law firm and you need a good accountant firm.
From the very first step.
Exactly, can't be different. And even though we have many rules in Brazil, even though it's very bureaucratic, the rules are there. They are very transparent. Even for the discussions we have, we know where we can get. There is not just one final answer from the tax authority and then you're dead. That's not how it happens. You do have many opportunities to discuss there. And of course, if our federal Supreme Court says in a last word that you don't have the chance, of course, you should just go home. And
at least you tried.
You tried, but then you have many opportunities to try. And I think that's already very different from many countries in the world. But coming back to your question, regions such as the North and the Northeastern region present some very special incentives, tax incentives. And tax incentives in Brazil, they exist in the municipal, the state, and the federal instances. So basically, there are many provisions in Brazilian law that will allow the investors and that will allow a company to pay less taxes, or perhaps for some 10 or 20 years, not even pay some special taxes, depending on the activity that they do, depending on the region that they decide to open their company. and perhaps depending on the kind of workforce that they will hire. So there is no quick way to understand all those tax incentives. There is one quick way, the AmCham guide, how to manage corporate taxes in Brazil. That's a very quick way to understand the tax incentives, but not extensively. And the truth is, this is definitely part of the initial planning that an investor or an international company must do when they come to Brazil. So you will look for a law firm, you'll try to understand what the tax burden is, you will try to understand what sorts of licenses you will need to get to open your company. You will need Ramon here to help you with all the legal representative responsibility, which is
which is very complicated because they need to trust me and I need to trust my client, because if they make a wrong step, I will pay for that.
This is a very
sensitive thing for you to
very sensitive, and some people, and this is one thing I think that's very special about what Ramon said, is you should never confuse the role of your lawyer and the role of your legal representative. I mean, it has to be very clear what that person does, and a good orientation in that matter.
Otherwise, it's going to be a conflict of interest.
Exactly. There's definitely a conflict of interest. So, there definitely needs to be a look on these different tax incentives, depending on the city that you will try to, where you want to open your company, the state where you want to plan your business, and in the federal plan, there are also many different tax incentives that you might pursue. Depending on your activity. So that needs to be part of your initial planning so that you can do the proper calculations before you actually start doing your business in Brazil.
Great. There are so many great answers. I can talk about AmCham, and since we have regional units coming from the northeast to the south of Brazil, and local development on many measures, such as a very manufactured development in the south of Brazil, oil and gas in Rio de Janeiro, and also services and finance and manufacturing in São Paulo, and we have oil and gas in other parts of Brazil as well, chemicals in Salvador, for example, and in a digital ecosystem, very important in Recife, for example, the northeast part of Brazil. So when we come to technology, in various sectors, Brazil is very advanced when we talked about agriculture technology, on the agri-tech, when we talk about the finance system, because we have a very developed finance system as well. When we talk about oil and gas offshore, mainly a lot of technology developed on this sector as well. So when we look, and it's not just in, I mentioned, of course, São Paulo is a very representative state in Brazil, but when you look on clusters, depending on what we are looking for, on what we want to develop, on customers, on products or services that you want to provide in Brazil, yes, you have to see Brazil as a whole, and we are talking about 200 million people that they live very, very spread. We have a concentration in the southeast, but it's also they lived in various states and the different needs, and of course different competition. Many companies come to Brazil to also establish their hub in Latin America, or even their innovation center, for example. There are several, especially when talking about our contacts, are more of American companies when they come to Brazil, and several of them that are expanding and opening their innovation centers in Latin America. as well, and as a form of develop new products and services as a hub in Latin America, looking at Latin America, but also looking at the Brazilian market as well. So it's not what we are trying to say here. It's not the opportunities are here. The market is huge, and we have many gaps. But it's not easy to navigate. Rely on trust people and find good partners are essential for helping you to do business in Brazil. And of course, I can talk about how AmCham can help, but we have a very developed ecosystem on institutions, on associations that are very representative within the country, depending on your sector, depending on what you want to do, and help you with those connections. Of course, AmCham is here for that. But when you look to other institutions as well, they're very helpful on connecting with the right people. And that's what we are talking about. Changing a little bit, I have a question here about the Latin America as well. And for the past couple of months, different Latin American countries have been going through political and social instability. Is Brazil expected to be somehow impacted? Or how do you see the impact on that instability from some South American and Latin American countries? And if not, is it possible to see Brazil as an instability island in the region? Or how do you think that we are going to be impacted?
I would say always this can reflect in Brazil as well, because we are not an isolated island. So and we change many things with Latin America, and we depend on Latin America as well, because we have not such a huge market as Brazil, but we have big markets in Latin America as Argentina, as Chile, and all of them, including Central America and Mexico. So we've been changing many things and many business with the region. And obviously, those crises can impact somehow in Brazil. But the good thing in Brazil is that, at least I feel like this, that we have, how can I say, strong institutions that can keep the country on the track. So this is something, we've been some movements trying to, how can I say, to storm something, and we see the people can react through institutions and through democracy and through the elections. I've seen those process of election in Brazil very clear, and I'm very confident on that, because we see in the day-to-day people in the street talking about this or that political position, but those institutions are there. Sometimes they can make some strange decisions or something like this, but structurally, we can feel that we can, as lawyers, we can trust on the system. And every time you have a contract in here, the contract will be executed as it is. So obviously depend on the interpretations or something like this, but structurally, I can feel that we can still trust in Brazilian, regardless those crises we can see in our neighborhood. And sometimes I would say that Brazil can also help those economies and give them this expertise or something like this, as Argentina can be facing some crisis, but we are together, we are very near. So it's kind of a same market. When we talk about Latin America, we are together. So a little bit different the language, but we can feel we are the same clothes, the same everything we can buy for the very first one provider, which is in Europe or in US. So the reality is almost the same. Then in Brazil, we can still trust him.
I would also add, Camila, that Brazil is a democracy. So, I mean, it doesn't matter if you agree with the Federal Supreme Court, with the decisions it may issue in a week and maybe a different decision in the other week. But the truth is, everything that the Congress does, everything that the federal government, state government, and municipal governments do it is actually based on our law. We have a very controversial law, but truth is, our constitution is there, and our institutions are very strong. So every time there is this big controversy in the country about a recent decision that the Federal Supreme Court issued and that nobody agrees, or maybe half the country agrees and half the country doesn't agree.
It's legally valid.
I mean,
We need
it's
to
legally
respect.
valid. I mean, there is a federal constitution, and there are provisions in which, on which the tribunal was based when they issued that decision. And there is no point in bringing other examples. I heard some people this last week saying, well, that wouldn't happen in the Supreme Court of the United States. I said, yeah, it wouldn't happen because the Supreme Court of the United States works in entirely different ways. They choose the cases that they will try. That's not the case here in Brazil. The Federal Supreme Court, by our federal constitution, it basically needs to see a lot of stuff that, honestly, I don't think should even rise to the highest court in Brazil. So let's not bring other examples to try to judge what happens in Brazil, because the truth is we have our own laws, our own federal constitution, and our own culture. So we should judge and evaluate what we think it's valid or not under how things work in Brazil and not in different countries of the world. That's my opinion.
We have some more minutes for our discussion, and I definitely couldn't finish the webinar without asking about corruption. So talking about the current scenario of we're fighting against corruption in Brazil, and how can foreign investors conform to the Brazilian anti-corruption legislation?
Yeah, it's a very good question, Camila, again. Well, we've seen this very transformation of the market, of the environment in Brazil, from those Lava Jato operation and something like this. So we wouldn't say everyone is now an angel, but we know that someone is watching what we are doing. Talking about the banking system, we have everything crossed with the federal revenue, so everyone can follow the money. So, and always corruption is something about people, something you would learn in your home by your parents, so something very simply to handle, but it's always on the table, something about corruption. My recommendation, my personal, that's something we do in our firm, it's never surrender something to someone who is offering some facility to cut corners through corruption. So if you do the first thing wrong, you are committed always for life. And so I would say corruption in Brazil, I feel that nowadays we have a very strong system that can put things on the track, but it's always about human, behavior. But we always try to train our people, our team, to not surrender on anything, not accept anything which is strange. And we are every time worried about it, because this can contamine the whole market. It's been contaminating positively last few years because of those operations, and they are putting very important and powerful people on the jail. So we've seen the law working, the law enforcement really working here in Brazil. I would say this is something we can bet that we will still in place, and people cannot allow this to get a cut corner or something like this, because we feel that people can put the country in the right way. And we've seen something like this. Again, we are not everyone angels or saints or something like this, but in your day-to-day, you can do something, counting on the Brazilian strong institutions. Those are the tools we have to keep things working against corruption every time.
André, you want to come a little bit
What I
on
would
that?
say is, I think we've come to a point, Camila, where we don't accept it anymore. So I think every country comes to that point someplace in time. And I think we reached that point in time nowadays. Brazil can't take it anymore. The Brazilian population can't take it anymore. And we can already feel a different environment. Companies who used to accept these sorts of practices don't accept anymore. Some people who used to surrender, to use a term that Ramon used, who used to surrender to those practices don't surrender anymore. So I think we reached that point. It's not perfect yet. Still many problems, but I think both are, not both, but every one of our different government levels are actually doing their best to cut the remaining problems that we still have. I think we all are reaching a good direction.
And mainly in the business environment, we have those compliance departments which are really working nowadays, because maybe 15, 20 years ago, they had a compliance system and a compliance department just to show. But nowadays, because we're here in AmCham, we've been changing ideas with people which are associating here, and they are really working on that.
Yep.
You know, really huge teams, and day to day, they are teaching their team about culture, about not surrendering, and something like this, which is important. So, as I said, it's about human behavior, how to change human behavior, enforcing and training. You know, but
Yep.
we are very committed with that.
We've been talking here at AmCham about in a compliance within our members, and we have seen that, of course, it was the beginning was a little easier for international companies, where they have the very program structured from internationally and enforced in Brazil. But also there's a movement of the Brazilian companies that are not, after all we've been fighting against corruption, structuring themselves as well to have this very important and relevant compliance departments and executives, and within the organization as a whole, to improve awareness of that the law is going to be enforced. So definitely, it's very important movement. Of course, we had in the past all the scandals, but all of that was important in this process on law enforcement to get where we are today on compliance within the corporations and the environment in Brazil. And also, one thing that I would like to add, not in this, but to mention that Brazil is a very melting pot society. We are talking about many cultures here, formed by immigrants from Japan, from Italy, from Germany, from Africa, from many countries, from many parts of the world. So it's a country where diversity is on our DNA. So when we talk about who can be Brazilians, we can actually be anything. We can be black, white, Japanese, and yellow, and anything, actually, with very different backgrounds. And this, within this, we became a very diverse society within the country. This is very important. This is for me, it's one of my opinion. That's why the creativity in Brazil is very well appreciated. So when we talk about human resources, when I talk about labor force, Brazilians are very creative. And companies, when they come here, when they look for solutions, they also look for this creativity and creation of new products and innovation as well. We have just our last minute, and I would like you to tell me if you have one advice for the people that are watching us today, learning about Brazil and how to do business and invest here. If you have like 30 seconds for one advice, what would that be?
Well, I would say very clearly in 3 words: come to Brazil. This is a very big place to be. We have a huge market. We have people involved with fighting against those bad things that had in the past, like corruption and stuff like this. And I can feel by myself and by my team and people I have relationship. So this is time of changing. We've been changed a lot. And I know that we can change a little bit more and something more until that's not about a perfect word, but sometimes when you are trying, this is the result. Keep trying. It's the result itself when you're trying to do something better, you know.
I was thinking here, Camila, next time we want to do something for perhaps to bring people to do business in Brazil, perhaps we could change this background to a beautiful beach in Bahia or Ceará. That would be great.
They already
Then
know
then when we
that.
say come to Brazil, it would be so attractive. But but all jokes aside, my message is also very simple. Opportunities are huge and risks. Opportunities are huge, but the risks can be mapped and can be dealt with. So there's a lot to do here. And whatever different things you need to know about tax law, legislation, judiciary, you will get to know through good law firms, good accountants, and AmCham. So that's it.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ramon and André. I appreciate. Thank you so much for joining us for this webinar. And I hope that you had a good opportunity to learn more about Brazil and how to navigate in the Brazilian system. And please, we are at your disposal to help you with any question that you have.
I'm not sure question today. You have our contacts.
We can send the contacts of
just to feel everyone free to give contact. We can clarify something that can be in the air, so it would be a pleasure also.
Great. Here's your first connection if you don't have. So please come with AmCham Brazil to help you on that process, and of course with our great partners that we have here. So thank you so much, and see you soon. Bye bye.